Afternoon, guys. Now, as I mentioned, my sons and I are, well, the rest of the whole gang, we camp where we hunt whitetails. We camp in the same spot every year, which is kind of good because it gives, when we come in, whitetails know, here they come, and they can hear us setting up camp, and they can hear us chopping wood, sawing wood, chopping wood for our big tent wood stoves and things like that, and so here they are, same bunch, and they might be curious about that and walk by our tents at night, and yeah, that's them all right, smell the same, the voices sound the same, the vehicles sound, even the engines sound the same, everything is the same, it's got to be them. And they've become so accustomed to it after 31 years, well before this actually, that they don't worry about that. But I remember when we first began doing this, back in early 1970s, and my children were coming into deer camp, and pretty soon I had three excitable, noisy kids in camp, making a lot of wreck, laughing and having a good time and yelling, and even when they were playing cards, you could hear them a mile away. And I was really surprised early during that time, and it affected the way we've hunted whitetails ever since. I remember that first year when I had a bunch of noisy people in camp, and my dad included. He never could understand this. We'd ask him to try and be a little bit quiet, and he had a voice you could hear a mile away. That's Dad. In fact, the first deer I ever got, it was because of his voice, because the deer were running toward me because they heard him talk over there. And anyway, and if any of the kids happened to say something to him about, Dad, or Grandpa, you should try to be more quiet, he'd get kind of upset by that. Like, what do you know about deer? I've been doing this for years, I've shot hundreds of them. You don't have to worry about that. And I remember that really bothered him when a little kid told him he should be quiet and talk quietly.
Grandpa, you really should whisper, "Ah, all right!"
Which is almost impossible for him. He is a politician. Well, anyway, but that first year, that particular year, after I had made quite a number of permanent tree stands, that was back in the years when you could do that. I was making permanent tree stands by out of branches from trees, platforms up in trees with railings on them and ladders going up there and that kind of thing, for all my kids. And I did it on purpose because that country was a big, huge roadless area. The only road was that accident roads getting in there, and it was just really rough, thick, a lot of heavy growth and trees and bogs and swamps and around there. And there were quite a number of hunters over the years when I was first hunting there. I had walked into that area and never came out again and were never found again. And boy, to turn your children loose in a place like that seemed kind of dangerous to me. So I made tree stands for them, and I would lead them out to their tree stands. After a while, they knew how to get there themselves. But by that time they were well trained, but I would lead them out there and say, don't you dare come out of that tree stand until I come here to get you. After a morning hunt or an evening or afternoon hunt, you'd stay there. And then I felt kind of secure about letting my kids be alone in a place like that. Well, after a real jubilant 2 or 3 days before the season started, we always went up early to set up camp and cut wood and stack wood and get things all set up and play a few games of cribbage and have a good couple of meals and a good night's sleep. I was really surprised on opening morning when I was taking kids out to their permanent tree stands that were within a quarter mile of camp. There was no tracks on any of the trails there. And that really surprised me because when we scouted there, boy, those trails were really well used by deer. What the heck's going on here? But I remember when we were in camp a few times, I said, boy, these kids are making too damn much noise. And so I finally came to the conclusion that all that noise was affecting our deer a lot. And it was making them move further and further away from camp. And all that stuff that we did closer in was a waste of time. And boy, that was a lot of work for nothing. And so the following year, we instituted a new camp rule. You always speak softly while you're in deer camp and avoid making a lot of unnecessary sounds. No more cheering or laughing or making all that kinds of racket. Be quiet as much as possible. And after doing that, I was kind of surprised that, I was worried about, wow, what about all this sawing and cutting and splitting wood? How that might be affecting a deer. But as long as people were fairly quiet in camp, the cutting and chopping and splitting wood didn't seem to bother the deer. And it must have been because along this road, which was about 20 miles long, there was always some logging going on. The deer year-round were hearing sawing and chopping and cutting wood, and I suppose that's why it didn't bother them particularly. So I was happy to hear that. So that's fine, we can cut all the wood we want or need without worrying about that part of ruining deer hunting. So that was important. But keep that in mind, if you're going to camp in the woods, you don't want to be chasing all the deer further and further from your camp before you even get to start hunting. You got to keep your sounds down to a minimum there. I remember back then there was a group of young guys who camped about 2 miles north of us. And they were inexperienced hunters. And one of the things they always did, they'd come up early and they'd race each other up and down that road with their ATVs, and they were doing bootleg tours with dust flying in there. They would have more fun doing that. And before long, they were complaining that all the deer in this area are in the Nordberg hunting area. And they didn't think that was fair. And they were sure about that because, gee, we'd have 3, 4 nice big bucks hanging behind our camp on a tripod early in the hunt, and they wouldn't be seeing any. So all the bucks for living were re-hunted. They never suspected that the way we hunted made the difference. That they had maybe just as many, but I'm sure all that ATV fun they were having had a lot to do with how near the deer were to their camp by the time they started hunting. And probably the areas they worked on to hunt, that were within a quarter mile were just no good. So, keep these sounds to a minimum. And then, when you are there, don't be driving everywhere with ATVs and OHVs and all that kind of thing to get your stand size. I don't care if you have to go 1 mile or 2 miles, walk there. And your odds of taking a buck are going to be much, much better, especially if you walk properly. You got that? Yeah. Yeah, here's typical, here's a case of that. I'm not making up stories about walking a long way. On this particular day, the temperature was 6 below zero. And we had a strong wind blowing from the north. And it was a miserable day to be out hunting. And I'm wearing my warmest hunting suit here, the bib, and quilted pants or bibs and coat. And anyway, I had to walk a fair distance along our access road, an old forestry trail going into the woods, and finally get to the trail that leads to a stand site a long way up there. I mean, this walk was a long, tedious walk in the woods, and after the storm, with all the branches hanging down, the trail there was practically obliterated. You could go in the morning, went in there in the dark in the morning, and geez, where's the trail? There's all these branches sagging down, and you just about had to really know where you were going in order to get there. Well, I did, and I finally got there, and I sat out there, and once I was there, I decided, when it got close to noon, I'm going to stay here longer. I said, I won't go back for lunch. I'm going to stay here because I had seen deer there. And I kept thinking, oh, geez, the buck might be around here. They were does. I saw a couple does. And so finally, after a while, I just had to leave. I was getting really cold in that wind, blowing right at me across this feeding area. So I was returning. I was about 3/4 of the way back to that old access trail, that forestry trail, when all of a sudden there was John in front with me with his camera, and he snapped that picture of me coming down that trail. But we do that, you know. Us Nordbergs. We've had guests come with us from time to time to hunt with us. I invite them for one reason or another. And they always thought we were kind of nuts. Geez, we get up at 4 and we walk to hell and got way out, so far in the woods. They were scared to go with us. They thought, boy, if I ever got left here or got lost, I'd never find my way out of here. They were really worried about things like that. How you guys are nuts. You go so far out there in the woods, like, how do you find your way? Yes, this is crazy. They didn't want to hunt that way. And some of them loved it, but after they got used to it. But we walk along this, and it pays off, and that's one of the main reasons. Walked a long way doing it properly. One of the reasons we do so well is hunting older bucks. So keep that in mind. Now, one of the advantages hunting the way we do, our deer don't worry about it because we're stand hunters, and they don't worry about us when they see us walking in the woods because we don't stop and look around. We don't act like we're hunting. We look like we're harmless. We're only going way over there somewhere. And then if they do find us there, we're just sitting in a tree. And if they see us before they see them, they can sneak away, and they can live everywhere else in the woods without any problem, quite normally, which is really good. And it's good for buck hunting because the bucks don't leave the area. They stay there the whole hunting season. And that's why we're as likely to get deer on the last day we hunt as on the first day. So that really makes a difference in our buck hunting. Well, one of the things we've done since 1991, or 1990 rather, we never shoot does. And the reason, we're not being elitist, say, oh, we only shoot older bucks. It's because there were only 11 deer per square mile when I started my studies there in 1990. And that's not a full complement of deer. But we had big wolf packs, up to 12 of them in a pack. And we knew right away that these wolves were having quite an impact on our deer. And we soon learned that the wolves were eating 3 out of 4 of our fawns every year. And so, well, if we're going to have a full complement of deer here, and especially bucks to hunt every year, we won't shoot does. So we decided. And then, I had already known about distributions of whitetails quite a long time, and I knew that there was always, in a square mile, there were bucks that didn't breed. They didn't breed because they were chased out. They were lesser bucks. They weren't quite as big or as mean, aggressive as that big dominant buck that lived in that square mile. And those lesser, older bucks be chased out of there and kept out of there while does were in heat and kept out by that big dominant buck. And he was fierce. I mean, when they were at that time, those big bucks are capable of killing other bucks. And they're not just playing when they're battling anymore. They're there to win that battle quick. And these other bucks know that, and they kind of stay out of the way of that big buck when the does are in heat, especially in November. So those are bucks nobody hunts because they're not usually there. When they're off range, they're hiding in little pockets somewhere, or dense cover where they got food and water, and they can stay out. They aren't going to be bothered by that rampaging dominant buck for a couple of weeks while does are on heat. And people hardly ever hunt them. And if you take one of those bucks, you're not really hurting the overall deer population very much, if at all, because these deer don't really contribute to restoring or improving deer populations from year to year. They're just kind of drones there, and so taking them doesn't really alter overall population of a whitetail too much. As long as you don't overdo it. You know, there's only so many in a square mile, and so what we generally were thinking all at once, it only take one big buck in a square mile each year. And that's what we did, and we hunted as many square miles as we could to do that. And it generally took 4 square miles to get 4 mature bucks. Bucks 3.5, all the way up to 6.5 years of age. Some of those lesser bucks are really big bucks. They're really nice, full, you know, when they're 4.5 to 6.5, they're in their prime. 5.5 is the best year. And they look really good, except there's one bigger one, see? And so they're out of luck, no matter how good they look. But so we hunted those kind of deer and felt good about it. But we limited, when we got our 4th buck, that was it, we were done. It didn't mean we'd rush home right away. If we had a few days left over, we'd stay in camp, we could play cards and enjoy ourselves by living in our camps in the winter, which I always did. So that was kind of a neat way to hunt until things started getting bad. And about a couple of years ago, all of a sudden we didn't have any deer anymore because of overabundant wolves just kept chopping away at our deer population. It was affecting them a lot. And all of a sudden our wolves are starving. And that's where they are today. But at any rate, those are the deer we hunted. Now, there were some advantages to this. First of all, by not hunting does, a lot of our does began to realize we don't bother them. And they weren't afraid of us. I mean, we'd be sitting in the woods and gee, oh, here comes a deer, I can hear him right behind me, downwind. But they're stopping and, oh, there's 2 of them, and one comes on this side right there, or one over here. They're eating leaves off of little red oak saplings, like, or something else, like red osier stems or whatever. And it's a doe, and here's the fun. And they're not paying a bit of attention, even though they were downwind of me, you know, darn well, here I am, right here. But they don't care, they nothing to worry about. And that happens to us a lot. We see a lot of does where we hunt because they aren't afraid of us. And because of that, we generally have a lot of doe decoys, live decoys around us when we're hunting bucks. And generally, almost all the bucks we take each year are bucks that have been attracted by does to feeding areas. And they're easiest to see them because they're moving around, they stop a lot, and, you know. They're easy to see, they make easier targets, and here's the big buck with them, and that's where we get them. And so having does that aren't afraid of us really helps to improve our odds of taking big bucks. We have does that have been bedding near our camp for decades, within 75 yards, in a couple campsites that we've used. And keeping track of our movements, they can lay there in their bed and see us going by and coming back, and they got our schedules all worked out so they can walk around our camp in the day and feed even by our tent if they want, because they know we're not there and we won't be back for a while. They got our schedule all worked out, and they kind of like that. And some of our yearlings, like yearling bucks, are doing the same thing because they're still with their mothers at that time, which makes them kind of vulnerable. Except in our camp, we don't usually shoot yearling bucks either, but we do allow first-time hunters, my young grandkids, boys and daughters, to shoot yearling bucks if they have a chance. And so I've got one coming this year, Jacob. Yeah. And I told him, anything with antlers, you take him, you know. And if it's a yearling, and he's got the right to do that. And we like to give him a good start in deer hunting. So we got that. But you see, by doing what we do and living in camp and not alarming deer even around our camp, and kind of honoring does in a way that makes them not be alarmed by us particularly, our odds of taking older bucks are improved in another way. You see, bucking is a lot more than just buying some bullets and light and going out in the woods. There's a lot to know, and a lot of guys don't want to do all this. You know, I said, well, if that's the way it's got to be, I'm going to just shoot does and be happy. But, but, uh, but if you want to be somebody that takes bucks a lot, these are the kind of things you need to know. Well, with that, I've talked enough for this seminar. So, if you haven't got your book yet, you know it's less than a month now, or about a month from now, when the first hunting seasons begin. Some states hunting whitetail has already began. So it's all right to be thinking about deer hunting this year. And I know you got kids that are going to school and you got to buy clothes and stuff they need, but this is a bargain, a book like this one, because you're going to have this one the rest of your life, and you're going to refer to it every year while you hunt whitetail. So get your book. If you haven't got it now and you want all this stuff to refer to that I talk about, it's right here. And with that, be sure to subscribe, hit that red button down there, and also the thumbs up button if you enjoyed what you learned today. And that's a favor to me and to YouTube. And with that, thanks a lot, guys, and I'll see you again soon. Be sure to visit my website. Here's the link. Here you'll find links to my blog posts, my Twitter account, my YouTube account, my Amazon store with links to my ebooks, my son's eBay store, a money saver if you're ordering from Canada or other countries, my website bookstore, and much more.